Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsacharnoran Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Welcome tonight for the last portion of chapter 14 of the Bhagavad Gita. We will have a summary at the end of the class, so we won't have an elaborate one at the beginning, except some introductory points leading into the conclusion of the chapter. Last time, Krishna finished answering Arjuna's very first question, which was, what are the indications of one who has gone beyond the gunas? Gunas meaning sattva, rajas, and tamas. The combination of three qualities that make up this entire universe. And the basic point that Krishna made was that the one who has transcended the gunas, or what is called the gunatitaha, that person accepts those gunas, those three gunas, and their fluctuations without any reaction. So some years back, Amma was in Gujarat giving darshan. And if you've been to Gujarat in March, you know how hot it is. Extremely hot. And she was hugging all these people, thousands of people, in a ground, which means an outdoor, place. No air conditioning whatsoever, and everybody was boiling hot. It was about 108 degrees Fahrenheit, 40-something Celsius. She was okay with it, and she said later on, when I think of the suffering these people have in their lives and all the trouble they went to come here and meet Amma, then I forget everything else. That's the only thing that matters to me. So she is beyond all these characteristics, all these attributes like hot and cold, etc. She can withstand it all. That is because she has gone beyond. And the gunatitaha, or the one who has gone beyond these gunas, three qualities, they even accept those qualities in their own physical and subtle bodies. They witness what's going on in their body, but they don't identify with it because they're beyond. And they witness and they put up with it, or they accept it in other people as well. If someone is cruel or mean or disrespectful, doesn't affect them. Praise also doesn't get them puffed up either. So they remain unflapped in any and all external circumstances. That's the point. And even the behavior of other people doesn't affect them. So of all the questions that Arjuna asked, there's one question left, and that is how to go beyond the gunas and how to become a guna titaha. Not just what are they like, how do I attain that state, which is something I would imagine everybody's interested in reaching. Because it means a knower of the self, a self-realized being. So we get to eavesdrop on that conversation between Krishna and Arjuna on a topic that will certainly interest all. But it's a difficult question because going beyond the gunas means that we ourselves have to reach the state of attributelessness. Now I perceive so many qualities and attributes in myself. How can I get rid of all these attributes and become the formless supreme? How can we say, so when something has attributes, we call it saguna, and something that is free from all attributes, we call it nirguna. So saguna, nirguna. So with attributes is saguna, without attributes is nirguna. I need to use those words now, so I'm just explaining it to you. How can the saguna become nirguna? That is a very difficult question to respond to. In fact, it is truly an impossible task. Attributes can change, like a small boy can grow up to be a big man. This is a simple modification of the gunas. It's not changing saguna to nirguna. And in fact, the gunas in our physical and subtle bodies are constantly changing, but they will never suddenly go away. It's not that you'll be free from all qualities, all attributes suddenly. By definition, the physical body and the subtle body, which is the energy, mental sheath and the intellectual sheath, those will, by definition, they always have attributes. They're part of Maya, and Maya is trigunatmika Maya. It's made up of the three gunas. So that's what Krishna said earlier on in this chapter. So those qualities will always be there. So how can saguna ever become nirguna? What do you think? The answer is that it cannot. It's a trick question, really. That which has attributes can never become the attributeless. And the same holds for the opposite. Nirguna can never become saguna. Something that has no attributes cannot suddenly have attributes. Either it has or it doesn't, and it remains that way forever. So then what in the world are we trying to do here? What in the world are we talking about? The real goal of spirituality is not to convert saguna to nirguna. What is the goal? To realize that we have always been nirguna. We have always been free from attributes, never made up of attributes. That means we've been identifying with the wrong thing. When we identify with the saguna, with all the attributes in the physical and subtle body, that is when we get into trouble. And it's like when a person gets highly identified with the images projected on a movie screen, even they will react physically. Something shows up on the screen and everybody moves backwards, or they're looking forward, or they're moving around in their chairs, or crying or laughing, because they're identifying with what they're seeing on the screen. If that can happen on a movie screen, just imagine you're stuck in this body. Of course it's going to happen. But we have to understand that it's not much more real than what we're seeing in the movie theater, because it is not us. We have done this millions of times. We've had millions of bodies over and over. And each time we identified with them, and then we forgot, and then we identify the next time also. But there is this entity that is carrying on and never changes and is going from body to body. This is the Jivatma. And the Atma, once we separate ourselves from that identification, we realize that we were never the body in the first place. So this saguna status, the status of having attributes, is merely a misconception. This is what all the scriptures say. And Amma says the same thing. It's simply a cognitive error. the common example of the rope and the snake helps us tremendously because, that's why it's used so many times. People, oh yeah, the snake and the rope, I know, it's an old hat, but the problem is, if it were old hat, we should have imbibed it and understood the meaning. But we need to hear it over and over again. So let's say I misperceive the rope to be a snake. Did any change take place in the rope? No. Obviously, the rope did not become a snake, and so I don't have to convert the snake back into a rope, right? And anyhow, it's impossible to do something like that. So just like that, there's no need to convert saguna to nirguna, which is anyhow impossible. So what do I have to do to correct my cognitive mistake? Well, maybe I'll do a lot of actions. Is that going to help me? Let's say that in the dim dusk light here in Chicago Ashram, you sometimes see deer, like a baby deer, doe. But you might, in the dim light, you might think that doe is a coyote. We have coyotes also. So will your misperception of the doe as a coyote, will that go away if you plant a tree? Or you wash the dishes? Or let's say you go and do some puja, or you chant your mantra, or sing a bhajan. Is that going to change that wrong cognition? Most likely not. Unless any one of those actions happens to invoke Amma's grace, then anything can happen. We know that. And there was this morning when on the live stream, there was a funny story about one of the brahmacharyas was narrating that one of the senior swamis fell ill. And it was mysterious and, seemed very serious. And so the Ayurvedic doctor was trying to cure his condition. And no matter what medicine he gave him, he tried his best to cure this Swami. And it didn't have any effect. In fact, he was getting worse and worse. So he notified Amma. And he said, Amma, what should I do? Because I've tried everything. Amma said, don't worry, he'll get better. And then the doctor, he's an elite doctor, at least in those days. He was the head of the Ayurvedic Society in Kerala for many years. So such a person, how can you tell me it doesn't matter? I've been doing this for decades. He must have found it hard to believe what Amma said. And then Amma said, this is the funny part, she says, you just give him some medicine. Doesn't matter, close your eyes, pick one, give it to him, he'll get better. And the doctor, for a moment, he was shocked. He couldn't believe himself. But he had the surrender to do that. And he I don't know what he gave the Swami, but he gave him something and he got better. Not because of our prowess, not because of the doctor's, intelligence or all that, but because Amma's grace was there and he was cured. So, if it's divine grace, anything can happen. But the point actually is that these sadhanas have their own intended purposes. And that's why they don't help in directly removing the misconception in our mind, because it's not their purpose. They have other purposes. All the seva, all the selfless service, all the social service we do is for the sake of inner purity. And without that, we will never be able to acquire the patience to sit for a puja, to sit for bhajans, to sit and chant our mantra or meditate. We need it for that purpose, for sure. And unless we acquire the patience and purity to do all these sadhanas, the mind will never acquire the subtlety required to remove that misperception. So all of these things are connected, and we have to do them, but we have to know when to do them and when we need to do other things. So we don't expect it to change if you just vacuum the floor. It's not going to go away. That misperception of our own self is a much deeper problem that we have to face and address, confront through a very rational and staged approach. So without understanding the proper application of the different types of sadhana, we can easily get stuck on the path. In truth, the only way to remove a wrong perception is what? To perceive correctly. It's so obvious, but we think we can do all these other things and that we're going to suddenly get realized. It's called samyak darshana, seeing properly, seeing perfectly. And that can even be instantaneous, but there are a number of steps that must take place beforehand. That's why Amma is encouraging us all to do many different spiritual practices, because each one of us is engaged in a different phase of that process. And we may also feel throughout the day, if you're feeling sleepy, don't try to meditate because you're going to fall asleep. So you could stand up and walk around and chant your mantra, etc. So in the case of our own self-perception, the correction comes when we see our true self as being nirguna, attributeless, not the saguna, body and mind. So we have 2 verses to cover today, and we will chant the first one, which is verse 26. You can repeat after me. It's a little difficult, so we'll chant it slowly. Mancha yo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. And one who worships, or we could say serves, me with unswerving devotion, going beyond the gunas, is eligible or fit for attaining Brahman. One who serves me with unswerving devotion, going beyond the gunas, is fit for attaining Brahman. So, in his commentary for this verse, Shankaracharya says, the one who serves me, Lord Narayana, dwelling in the hearts of all beings, with bhakti yoga and undeviating devotion, he transcends the gunas. As its essence, bhakti yoga has discriminative knowledge resulting from divine grace. Such a sage becomes fit or competent for winning liberation. I love this commentary that Shankaracharya offers for this verse, because it unifies all the concepts that we have to understand. So, in the actual verse, he says, the one who worships me. Okay, but what does me refer to? Shankaracharya clarifies it. Lord Narayana dwelling in the hearts of all beings. So we have to serve all beings. Well, now we know I am serving all beings, because that is what someone who has transcended the gunas, that's what they do. And that is bhakti yoga. And undeviating devotion or unswerving devotion. Such a person transcends the gunas. And he says bhakti yoga has that discriminative or discerning knowledge, that knowledge that comes from discernment. And that results from divine grace. So we need divine grace, we get that discerning power, and then that is the only way to actually have proper bhakti yoga. Because in order to serve all beings, we have to relinquish all of our likes and dislikes, like this topic that Amma is going through every morning during the live stream, talking about nimitta matra bhava. So you should only be an instrument in the hands of God. In order to do that, we have to relinquish all of our likes and dislikes, or increasingly more relinquish them. So he's tying together bhakti yoga and service, which is an aspect of karma yoga, and jnana yoga, because of the power of discernment being applied in that process. Here, Sri Ramakrishna Devan says, the devotee sees Ishvara, or God, in many forms, but when he enters samadhi, he realizes the same God as the formless, infinite nirguna Brahman. It is in this realization that bhakti and jnana are harmonized, that devotion and knowledge are harmonized. Now let us look at some of the nuances of the actual verse. One who serves me or worship, because service and worship are basically the same thing in the Indian tradition. If you have devotion, you will serve. And that service is actually a form of worship. So this is the sadhana to become a gunatitaha. It's strange because you would think that doing lots of actions would get you more engrossed in Maya. And here he is saying that if you worship and serve God in all beings, then you can transcend those gunas or those qualities. And so Krishna is saying that it's basically bhakti. It's bhakti yoga that helps us on that path. But it is not just any old bhakti, because a lot of people just think that bhakti is going to the temple and offering something, or singing a bhajan, or whatever, maybe doing a puja at home. But those actions may look the same on the surface, but the intention or the resolve of the person performing those actions may change, be different from person to person. There can be no self-interest in those actions. So when I'm serving society, or if I'm offering something at the temple, if I'm doing a puja in my house, my puja room, or if I'm singing a bhajan at satsang, or now all the satsangs are done on Zoom. So if we do these things with any selfish motives, it's not real bhakti. Or to the extent that we can remove those elements, it becomes real bhakti. So that's what he's talking about, real bhakti, the selfless bhakti. And can it be, when Krishna is talking about it here, this person is fit for attaining Brahman? That is a very high statement. It is not your average bhakta or devotee. It is not the one who prays to get anything from God. There's no transactional prayers for such a devotee. And even to the one who yearns to know God is still, this is the threshold of that. It's someone who started off as that jignasu who wanted to know God, but he's or she has reached that threshold of God realization, because he's saying that they are fit for Brahman. So this is sort of like that threshold between the jignasu and the jnani, the one who yearns to know God and the one who has known God. So it's the point where we need the Guru's grace to carry us across that threshold so we do attain self-realization. And then he gives a qualifying statement here as well, Krishna does. With unswerving devotion. Unflinching, unswerving devotion. And Jnanadev's commentary here really helps us understand how devotion leads the devotee to see God in everything, and also what does unswerving mean. This is what he says. Only one who renders service unto me with unswerving mind and devotion is able to burn the gunas. It is now necessary to make it clear to you who I am. What is the nature of devotion to me, and what is unswerving devotion? What would you do if Amma said that to you? It is now necessary to make it clear to you who I am. And she's going to tell you that, and she's going to say, what is real devotion to me? And we're like, oh no, do I have it or do I not have it? Most of us don't have it, so don't worry. Here's what he says. O Partha, I am in this universe in the way the gem and its brilliance are. In the way that the gem and its brilliance are one. I am what is liquidity to water, what is the void to the sky, what sweetness is to sugar, as flames mean fire, as the petals mean lotus, as the branches and the fruit mean the tree, as the massing together of snow means the Himalaya, or the curdled milk means curds. In all these ways, what is called the universe is nothing but me. So with these beautiful examples, Jnanadev is pointing out how God and this universe are the same thing. However, we should not forget that God is, Ishvara, yes, is just this what we can see. the whole prapancha, the whole universe. But when we talk about paramatman, then we really have to understand it goes well beyond this physical universe. Because even at the dissolution time period, there is still the paramatman, the atman still exists, Brahman still exists. It doesn't rely on this physical universe for its existence. So when we say the universe is nothing but God, it's true, but it's not the whole enchilada of God, to use a common expression. To continue with Jnanadev's commentary, it is not necessary to peel off the moon disk in order to see the moon. When ghee solidifies, it does not lose its quality of being ghee. A bracelet of gold, even if not melted, remains all gold, as it is. A piece of cloth, even without being unraveled, is all yarn. An earthen pot, even without being dissolved into its original state, is still earth. Therefore, it is not necessary to set aside the phenomenal world to secure me, since I am all-inclusive. It's a beautiful statement. You don't have to close your eyes to the world and say, I don't want to look at this world, I want to see God. He's saying, you're already looking at me, right? And this is exactly the way Amma sees this world. She never teaches us to say, don't look at the world, just close your eyes and go to a cave and sit there and meditate. She never says that. She says, we have to learn how to see God in this world. And this reminds me of a beautiful verse from the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas. If you didn't know there was one, there was. Verse 113. His disciples said to him, when will the kingdom come? Jesus said, it will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, here it is, or there it is. Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. The exact same thing that Krishna is saying. You know, you're not seeing me. You should see me in this world. It's the kingdom. From the Christian standpoint, maybe that's what they call it. Coming back to Jnanadev's commentary, he says, to know in this way is the only unswerving devotion to me. To make any deviation from this or allow any drawback to creep into it is swerving devotion. Sorry, I think we're all in the latter category. Therefore, dropping all distinctions, you should view me along with yourself. If a small speck of gold is soldered to another piece of gold, both no more remain separate. In that way, it is not proper for one to take himself to be distinct from the universe. A wavelet, however small, is not distinct from the ocean. In that way, the self is not distinct from the paramatma. The enlightened and joyous state of vision, emanating from this consciousness of complete oneness, is what we call devotion. Did you know that? Until you read these things. The enlightened and joyous state of vision emanating from this consciousness of complete oneness is devotion. So when we feel devotion, we're just getting a glimpse of that joyous state of God realization. The essence of knowledge and the entirety of yoga constitute this enlightened and joyous vision, which abides like uninterrupted showers descending from the clouds to the sea, leaving no gap between them. There is no joint as such connecting the mouth of a well with the sky, but they both are one without any such joint, right? You have the space inside the well, and then it has the top, where you put the bucket in, and then it's the sky, or it's space, you could just say. The word space and sky are the same in Sanskrit, akasha. So they are both one without any such joint. The oneness between a person of knowledge and the Supreme God is the same. Light is stretched out straight between the sun and its reflection in water. In that way, the notion, I am myself, the Supreme Brahman, is stretched outside, filling the gap between the individual soul and the Supreme Self. With such a notion once formed reciprocally, the one of knowledge automatically merges into the paramatman along with that notion. So the notion of us being separate from God dissolves once we understand that the self within me is one with that paramatman. So, and then even that notion of me is gone because I have become the paramatman. And he has another beautiful analogy to help us understand that notion. When a crystal of salt is once dissolved in the sea, its act of dissolution ceases to exist, like fire gets extinguished with the reducing of its fuel to ashes. So there's no more dissolution because that salt crystal is gone completely. You cannot identify it anymore in the ocean. Just like that, there's no individual soul left in Brahman, Paramatman when we merge. In that way, all sense of distinction is destroyed through knowledge. That knowledge. So this is beautiful. In that way, once all sense of distinction is destroyed through knowledge, even that knowledge itself ceases to exist. Very profound statement. Right now, I know myself. But unfortunately, the self that I know is Shantamritananda. It's not the paramatma. So, but once that notion of I am the paramatman comes, then that knowledge goes, because actually knowing Shantamritananda for me is not knowledge actually, it's just my existence. Because I am that for the time being, right? So like that, it's not a knowing because it's one with me. So like that, when we know the Paramatma, it's not actually knowledge because there's no object and knower. There's no knowledge, no knower, and nothing to be known. You just are that. The idea that I am on one side of samsara while the devotee is on the other side ceases to exist, and there remains only the original eternal union between the two. With such an embrace, in the form of this union, all talk of conquering the gunas ceases to exist. In short, such a state is Brahman, and this is attained only by those who worship me. So beautiful, and it shows how important it is for us to serve this whole world as being God, or we could just call it Amma's form. And he says that one who serves God like this, or we can call it Brahman really in the ultimate sense, that such a being will transcend the three gunas. That means they will become a gunatitaha, which means they realize their true nature. The sadhana for that is bhakti yoga, which takes us to the threshold of realization. And of course, for the actual realization, we need the Guru's grace. So let us move on and read the concluding verse of this chapter. This verse is also a little hard to pronounce, so we'll go slowly. Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vyayasya cha amritasya vyayasya cha Shashvatasya cha dharmasya sukhasya cha Don't feel bad. It took me a few tries to get that also. The meaning, for I am the abode of Brahman, the immortal and changeless, of everlasting dharma and of absolute bliss. In the previous verse, Krishna said that the sadhak or the seeker becomes fit to attain Brahman. It's a pretty bold statement, right? What does it mean? Well, to understand what it means, we need to understand what is the nature of Brahman. Fortunately, Shankaracharya answers that question preemptively in his commentary. I, the inner self, am the abode of Brahman, the paramatman. What is the nature of Brahman? It is the immortal and unchangeable sustainer of eternal righteousness and unfailing bliss, attainable through the yoga of knowledge and dharma. Since the inmost self is the abode of the Supreme Self, which by nature is immortal and supreme bliss, through perfect knowledge it is realized with certainty to be the Paramatman. This truth has already been affirmed in the previous verse. So he's saying that this is our actual nature, our true nature. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's not so simple. All you have to do is know properly. And that properly adverb is the most difficult part. We know ourselves only in the sense of the body, mind, etc. So he's not talking about that. He's saying knowing the real you. All you have to do is realize that, and that is the same as realizing the Paramatman. And then he adds something which kind of gives us some consolation. Brahman here can also refer to Brahman with attributes, as it signifies the term Brahman. So it's kind of a concession. To me, it sounds like a concession for those who are not able to conceive the formless absolute. You can use a symbol that makes you remember the Brahman, basically. So for us, that's Amma. That's why people have photos of her all over their house or on their keychain or wherever it may be. It's not just some fetish or some, cult of personality. It is a reminder for all of us, and if you don't think of it this way, you might want to consider it. Use it as a reminder for your goal to realize Brahman, to realize your true self. Because you have access to someone who has reached that stage. You can see her every morning if you want, and see how she behaves. That is the behavior of a realized being, someone who is merged or one with Brahman. In the verse, he says, I am the abode of Brahman. So it's kind of hard to understand why we would say that. Well, we first have to understand what he means by I. Definitely don't interpret it to mean the body. Here it refers to the consciousness, because that's the only thing that can possibly be considered to be the abode of Brahman. It's the Chaitanyam. And that is the inner self of all beings, like back in, I think it was chapter 13, Krishna, or maybe it was 12, I'm losing track, when he says, I am that, yes, Kshatrajna, yeah, it was in chapter 13. I am the Kshatrajna in all beings. I am that knower of the field, the one who knows this entire universe. That is me, and I abide in all beings. So that is what he's referring to, not anything else. And that is the embodiment of Brahman as we can understand it. Brahman as a term means the same thing as Atman, but it's looking from the total, from the standpoint of the totality. From the standpoint of the individual, we would call it Atman. But we can know Brahman by knowing the Atman, because it is the same thing. It's just, when we talk about it as the supreme being, we can say Brahman. It's not so much a reference to our own self, though, because it's just a sort of semantic difference. So I, the self of all, the Kshatrajna, am the abode of Brahman. Kshatrajna, remember, is the knower of the field, the knower of the universe, the one who is not actually identified with the inert universe. It is the pure consciousness. So even though these two are the same, Brahman and Kshatrajna, for one who only knows their own sense of I, all day long, I got to do this, I got to do that. He gave me this, this is mine. All these concepts are our little world, right? So it's easier to think of this self as the abode rather than it is Brahman, because we can kind of hard to wrap our head around being Brahman right now. But how shall we understand that Brahman? Krishna has given many descriptions so far in the Gita, and some of them are repeated here. He says immortal, it's changeless, it's everlasting. And the word dharma can come in association with the previous word, everlasting. We can say everlasting dharma, or we can say it is everlasting, and it is also dharma. So you can take it both ways. And remember that Amma says that dharma means one's own true nature, actually. That's one way of looking at it. So human dharma is to be humane. The dharma of a bee is to do what? Pollinate, right? If there were a bee that didn't pollinate, you would think, what kind of a bee is that, right? Because it's inherent in them. And just like the dharma of fire is to be hot. So humans also have a supreme dharma, or we could call paramatma, which is attaining moksha, or knowing the Atman, when you could say. So here, since the content or the context is self-knowledge, Shankaracharya interprets that word in that way, dharma in the supreme way. And then that word absolute bliss just means pure ananda, like we see in Amma when she sings bhajans and just starts laughing out loud. So this is the idea, is that this is what the seeker attains at that time. So with this final verse of the chapter, Krishna concludes the topic of how to become a gunatitaha and what is the benefit of that. That is the final topic. So just as this chapter touches on everything, from Amma also we learn that all paths are needed. Just not at the same time. You can't have bhakti yoga and jnana yoga at the same time. We get confused. If we want to just meditate on pure consciousness, we should not be trying to relinquish forms and names. So whereas when we're singing a bhajan, we may, to Amma, we'll remember Amma and all the sweetness, and that's okay. But if we try to mix them together at the same time, we can get confused. Karma yoga purifies us by reducing our vasanas. Bhakti yoga enables us to come in contact with Brahman through names and forms. Just imagine if we didn't have that form of Amma, how could we come in contact with God? How could we even imagine what it would be like to be realized? So she has given us this form and adorable name and form, and through that name and form we can interact or get closer to Brahman. And the final experience of nirguna Brahman, the attributeless supreme, is reached only through self-knowledge, as we have said many times. And all these points were covered in this chapter. So, like that, Amma teaches us to apply all the yogas, all the paths, as and when needed, not all at once. But it also has to be based on a proper understanding of each, what its role is, when it's needed, and when you need to do something else. Now, since we're talking about transcending the gunas, I'd like to share with you a little story from the Shiva Purana. There we read that Lord Shiva made elaborate preparations to invade and lay siege to the iron, silver, and golden citadels of 3 invincible asuras. Asuras are like demons. Ultimately, Shiva did not even need any of those weapons. It is said that all he had to do was just look at the cities, and that resulted in their total destruction along with the demons. So most of these stories in the Puranas are just symbolic. You don't have to take them too, literally. The 3 cities represent the 3 gunas. Iron is tamas, silver is rajas, and gold is sattva. And for an ignorant person like all of us, it is impossible to just snap your fingers or look at it and make it go away. The gunas, tamas, rajas, and sattva are not going to go away suddenly like that. But with the dawn of knowledge, which is signified by Shiva's eye of knowledge, they are instantly destroyed, not by force, but through transcendence. Here, Sri Ramakrishna Devan has a beautiful story he tells. He was a great saint and called an avatar also of the past, of the 19th century, and maybe into the beginning of the 20th, if I'm not mistaken. A wanderer was passing through a dense forest. 3 thieves sprang on him and overpowered him, taking all of his possessions. The first thief drew his dagger to finish off the victim. The second bandit said to tie up the fellow, leaving him to his fate. Having done so, the thieves left. In a short while, the soft-hearted third robber reappeared and released the victim and kindly showed him his way back home. The grateful wayfarer requested this unexpected savior to come along with him and accept his gratitude and hospitality. The stranger politely expressed his inability to go beyond his bounds and disappeared back into the forest. And the symbolism is what really helps us. The world is the forest. The 3 gunas are the 3 thieves. The jivatman is the wanderer. The jivatman means the individual soul. The divine qualities are his possessions that are stolen. The divine qualities are stolen by the gunas. Of the 3 gunas, tamas tries to destroy him. Rajas binds him with lust, greed, and anger. Sattva saves him from those fetters and shows him the way to God. But since sattva is also a guna, it cannot reach the proximity of Brahman. So beautiful. And Jnanadeva says something here, speaking on behalf of Lord Krishna. He says, in short, Brahman means nothing but my own self, and that very meaning I have made clear in this discourse. Like he said before, he repeats again, the moon and her disk are not distinct from each other. In that way, there's no distinction between myself and Brahman. It is eternal, steadfast, and vivid, the giver of unique and unbounded bliss, the place where discernment comes to rest, having completed its prescribed function. Isn't that beautiful? The Viveka Shakti, or the intellectual power, comes to rest, having completed its prescribed function. So the function of the intellect is really to lead us to realize who we are. But once that knowledge takes place, the intellect has no job anymore. Nothing. It's unemployed. It is that place of established truth, which is in fact my very own self. This brings the chapter to a conclusion, but we do need a little refresher. Let us review the chapter briefly, and we'll spend the rest of the time answering questions because I have a lot of them piled up right now. Okay, so if you happen to have forgotten, this chapter is part of the 3rd and final part of the Bhagavad Gita, the last 6 chapters. We can call it the 3rd section. The main teaching in this section is jnana, or knowledge of the self, spiritual wisdom. We can give it many different names, but it means acquiring knowledge of the real. The name, if you've forgotten, is the name of the chapter, if you've forgotten, is Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, which means the yoga of differentiating the 3 gunas. Why is that so important? Because after differentiating these three gunas and that which is not made up of the gunas, we will come to know what is real and what is unreal. Now, in the Indian spiritual tradition, the word real means something that exists in the past, present, and future. And we already know from previous classes that this whole universe is going to dissolve sometime, right? And then there'll be another creation after trillions of years or whatever it is. So this world is also does not qualify as real because it didn't exist before, it came into existence, and when the grand dissolution of the whole universe takes place, it's all going bye-bye. So that means the real must be something beyond this phenomenal world. And that is what we call Brahman. So we need to understand the reason why we should identify with Brahman or the consciousness rather than the inert world around us. And that logic is what Krishna gave us in chapter 14. The reasoning was like this. This world, or what he called the kshetra in chapter 13, this world of Maya consists of the three gunas, and those gunas are like poison to us. Even though the body is made up of them, the mind is made up of them, they are the ones that cause our samsara, because we identify with them. And in order to be free from samsara, this never-ending birth and death, cycle of birth and death, we should not identify with this world. I mean, there's a big difference between not identifying with it and scorning it, right? Amma never scorns the world. She will always help people. She will always be compassionate to everybody, all beings in this world. But she doesn't identify with it as being her own existence. She said from the very beginning, from the beginning of my life, I already knew that this world was not real, and I knew there was never a time that I didn't know who I really was. One of my favorite Amma quotes, as you know, because I say it over and over again. So she knew that, and now we have to know that as well. And the reason is because this world is constantly changing, and that those changes create sorrow for anyone who is attached to it. So the kshetrajna, or the knower, or the consciousness, we could say, is formless and never changes. So if you put your eggs in that basket, there's never going to be any sorrow, because you will always be peaceful. The more we identify with that which doesn't change, the more stable our peace will be. I'll give you an example, an extreme example. The former CEO of Hyundai, I think that's how you say it, they had just completed their new headquarters in Seoul, I believe, and it was, 14, 20 stories, something like that. And it was revealed. Until that point, he was revered as an entrepreneur and a symbol of Korea's business magnates, And then there was a scandal that was revealed that he had used some of the company money and sent it to North Korea for some, summit that was supposed to happen. It was a huge scandal, and he was completely disgraced. So he went from being the highest of the high to the lowest of the low. And what happened? He couldn't handle it. In that brand new headquarters building, from the 12th floor, he just jumped out and ended his life. So, nothing else mattered. When you're that much reverence, getting that much reverence and suddenly becoming disgraced, that change, it's not a change in the consciousness, it's a change in the gunas. People's treatment of us is also the gunas, as Krishna delineated in this chapter. So it creates a lot of pain and suffering in our mind when things change. Of course, this is an extreme version of it, but we can all do some introspection and see how we reacted when other people scorned us or criticized us. And to drive home this message, in chapter 14, Krishna pointed out all the defects of the gunas, all the ways they bind us and keep us in samsara. And after that he painted a vivid picture of the one who has gone beyond all those gunas and how beautiful that liberation is. And this is how the chapter was structured. The first 2 verses were an introduction. And then Krishna, in the next 2 verses after that, he pointed out that the whole world is born out of those 3 gunas, or trigunas, including our body, our mind, intellect, everything is made up of the 3 gunas. And that means that there's nothing devoid of them in this world. Anything you can perceive, either on the physical level or even within ourselves, like shame or guilt or like anger, all these things are made up of the gunas. That was the point in that section, verses 3 and 4. And then from verse 5 to 18, he talks about 4 aspects of the gunas, which was the definition of them, how they bind us, the indications of them, how we can understand when we are in one state or another. And he also talked about the effects that those gunas have on us in this world and the afterworld. And verses 19 and 20 were the main verses of chapter 14. They form the core of the philosophy there. And there, Krishna explained how to go beyond these 3 gunas, how to become a gunatitaha. This is what he said. When the seer perceives no agent other than the gunas and knows that which is beyond the gunas, which means the paramatman, he attains to my being. Having transcended these 3 gunas, out of which the body is evolved, the embodied one is freed from birth, death, decay, and sorrow, and attains to immortality. And if you remember that immortality is not of the body, it means that we realize that we are that eternal consciousness and nothing else. In the following verses, 21 through 27, Arjuna asks 3 questions. The indications and conduct of a gunatita, 1 indications to conduct, and how to become a gunatitaha. And the latter portion of that section is what we just read today. In response to the first 2 questions of indications and conduct of a gunatita, Krishna emphasized mental equanimity, meaning that the gunatitaha remains unperturbed and balanced in all situations. They have no anger, no frustration, depression, anxiety, or fear. And if you ever see those in such a being, like an amma, it is only a tool for them. It's hard to understand because we are the tool of anger most of the time. But imagine if it could be the other way around. You got this little anger thing in your pocket and you can take it out and just go like that and then put it back in your pocket whenever you want. That's amma. That's what she can do. She can be happy and then she can share in your sorrow. You know, you must have seen, if you were in that most recent retreat that Swamiji conducted from India, and the disciples in the West were also there. When she came on and she heard everybody saying, Amma, 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 she just started crying, right? Does that mean she's sad? I thought that realized beings are never sad. She's not sad. She was reflecting that emotion in all of us. And it was such a beautiful moment. I think we'll never forget it. But the point is that those emotions are just passing clouds in the infinite sky of her mind. And instead of pointing out each and every quality that they don't have, that transcendent gunatita doesn't have, Krishna just says that they have samatvam, they have equanimity, and that's enough for us to understand that under all circumstances they're peaceful. Inside, they may hurry to the gate for the flight if they need to. They may try to urgently send rescue to people who are in a disaster zone, or giving them a house or giving them food. She'll be really, eager to do it quickly. But inside, everything is completely still. It's hard for us to understand because we get affected by all these things. So that equanimity is so rock solid that it persists even when the body is very active and even when people criticize and try to harass them. So Amma has said that, when people praise us or criticize us, we should just understand that today somebody may throw flowers on our feet or, put flowers in the path before us, and the same person the next day will throw stones at us. We should not be affected by either one. A real seeker should not be affected. And I think we need to tattoo that on our forehead or on our hand or something, because we always forget that one. It's hard to accept both equally, but that is a sign of a mature spiritual seeker. Can handle criticism and praise equally. At the end of the chapter, Krishna emphasized the importance of bhakti, which has various levels, don't forget. And the highest level is that of the jnana bhakti or jnani bhakti, where there is no distance between God and the devotee. So ultimately, we want to feel like that. We have devotion to Amma, but that's because we're one with her. And there's no feeling of separation anymore. That is the highest form of devotion anybody can aspire to. And that is actually the same as being a gunatitaha and is the same as attaining Brahman. So with this, we will chant the concluding words that comes at the end of every chapter. You can repeat after me, and then I will move on to the questions that remain. If you have the Ashram Gita book, it comes on page 352. You can see it there on the screen as well. Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Sri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Gunatraya Vibhaga Yogo Nama Chaturuddashodhyayaha. Thus ends the 14th chapter named Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, the qualities of nature. I would say we need a little another differentiation of the three qualities of nature. Of the Upanishad, of the Bhagavad Gita, the scripture of yoga, dealing with the science of the absolute in the form of the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. So don't forget that we call the Bhagavad Gita a Upanishad because just like every other Upanishad, it is a conversation between the sage, the knower of truth, and the disciple. So, and this Bhagavad Gita has the same teachings as the Upanishads. And so therefore, it qualifies as an Upanishad. That's why it's also one of the three pillars of faith in India's tradition, called the Prasthanatrai, excuse me. Okay, we'll move on to the questions, of which there are quite a few. I couldn't get to them all before, so I'll try to finish them all tonight. I think the same person has sent a number of questions. So the first two will be a combination of just one. I'll combine them into one question, which is about moksha. Is working towards moksha a block, obstacle for a seeker? Because moksha is also a want, a desire, and karma yoga should be done without desires. And then the person says in chapter 18, moksha sannyasa also says the same. What is your opinion? First of all, I don't find any such reference in chapter 18, so I think this person might be mistaken in that regard. And the next question I'm going to read first and then respond to them together. Listening to Narada Bhakti Sutras, it suggests that one should do every action with pure devotion to God, and such devotees will not even think of moksha. It is also said that one who operates that way, God will take care of such a devotee and do what's right. Like it says in chapter 9, verse 22 of Bhagavad Gita, although desire for moksha had been the driving force for me before to perform sadhanas, when I'm listening to other devotional scriptures, it sounds like self-realization automatically happens at the right time, and that should not be the goal. Instead, I'm getting the feeling of focusing more on selfless seva and devotion, which may lead to jnana. Is this approach correct? Well, based on what Krishna said today, yes, it's correct, because he's saying that first you have to cultivate that pure devotion. Otherwise, there's no hope for God realization or liberation. We see in the Puranas many cases of where these, people do long eons of tapas, of austerity, so much meditation, so many spiritual practices, and the problem is that they don't have love, they don't have bhakti. They're just trying to get something only through techniques, sadhana. So it doesn't work that way. There has to be that vision of seeing God everywhere and having love and compassion for all beings and serving them selflessly. So I would say that when we have the wrong notion of what moksha is, that is when it becomes an obstacle to work for moksha. It's not really a personal desire at all. It is the end of all selfish thoughts. So moksha, if we can think of moksha as being the absence of all desires, if I can attain moksha, liberation, I can finally love God with my whole heart and soul. That's not a bad way of looking at moksha. It's not because I want to be happy. It's not because I want to have something that I don't have now. I want to get rid of that which is obstructing me from loving God with 100% of my being. So knowing your true self is the solution to all the practices, all the problems in life. Knowing your true self is the solution to all problems in life. So what is wrong with wanting to realize your true being? Nothing wrong with that. That is, in fact, the purpose of this human birth. It is not selfishness. It's the destruction of all selfishness. So if we can look at it in that way, it's a healthy desire because it's the end of all desires. And just to add on to that, we really don't understand moksha right now. So it's better and easier to focus on cultivating the right qualities of the heart. That also requires dispelling all the wrong qualities. So if we want to, because those wrong qualities, are what are obstructing our spiritual growth. So there were many references to those good qualities in chapter 13, so you can go back and look at those and try to remember what they were about. Yesterday, during the Gita class, this was submitted over a month ago, I'm sorry. Yesterday, during the Gita class, you said what Amma says about how death takes place and what is left behind. Please let me know where we can find this information. I got all of that from Awakened Children. And occasionally, I think it might have been from Amma's heart. And very rarely some of the Swami's and disciples' books. But most of it is from the earlier versions, the earlier volumes of Awakened Children. So you can I would recommend everybody, don't say, I read the Awakened Children, because you forget. And now you're a different person than you were when you first read it. So read it again and again. People don't say, I read the Bible once, I don't need to read it again. They read it every day. People who believe in that. So let us do the same thing with Awakened Children. There's so much to learn and relearn there. So someone was saying, it was one time we were talking about selfless actions. And I use the example of cooking for yourself as kind of like a self-centered thing, and this person got confused by that example, and I think she was right, or maybe it's not a she, but yeah, it wasn't a good example. This person's trying to understand my example, but I like to recant that example. It wasn't a good one. She has, or this person has some other better examples, like a selfless thing would be like there are many things that I do myself, like gardening, cook my own food and take it to work with me to be efficient. I also like to do lots of things to save money, like reusing, repurposing, fixing things, etc. I feel that this kind of lifestyle could be dharmic and in harmony with nature. Therefore, cooking for one's own needs should not be placed in the selfish category. Yeah, it's a good point. So, thank you for bringing that up. Here's another question. One of Ramana Maharshi's answers to the question of a disciple goes like this: there are no births, and the concept of being born is non-duality. This is the quote from Ramana Maharshi. There is no birth. The notion of being born is actually non-duality. I think this person has it backwards. There are no births, and the concept of being born is duality. That's what she means, I think, or this person means. That's the only way it makes sense, actually, because if Ramana Maharshi is saying it, he would call it duality. Being born is, that concept is a duality. Bhagavad Gita says in different places that the vasanas accumulated at the end would lead to life, including the creation after dissolution that happens after many years. And I've been through past life, so many past lives, and I'm trying to understand the intensity of the karma in this life. But Ramana Maharshi says there's no birth. So she's basically confused. This person's confused. So what I would say that one thing is choose one or the other. Either we have a conversation under the rules of non-duality, which is Advaita, or we have a conversation that is with the rules of duality, Dvaita. We cannot mix the two. That's a no-no. We can never mix Dvaita and Advaita in the same sentence. So if we are going to take the Ramana Maharshi standpoint, then you should not even be talking about your past lives. You would have to say, no, I have no past lives, because it's all, it's not me. I'm the Atman. So who is there to take birth and to die? There's nobody. I never died and I never took birth. If you can say that firmly with conviction, then there's no need to even talk about your births. But if you're talking about births, and this person was saying they were having past life regression consultations, well, that means that this person and all of us, the truth is that we're stuck in duality for the time being. So we can engage our mind in the concept of non-duality, but we don't experience it. It's just a concept. It's something that we can fantasize about. We can see how it manifests itself through Amma and so on, and how the sages and seers describe it. But don't mix it up with your own personal experience of being in samsara, because if you go beyond duality, then there is no samsara. Understand that. Samsara is only for people who live in duality. Birth and death are only for those who live in duality. So once you say they go beyond the gunas, they go beyond birth and death, they become immortal, that means no duality can be accepted in their mind. And if we want to step into the mind of such a being, you cannot mix duality in your words, okay? That's the point. Don't mix duality and non-duality. And next person is asking, is the mantra Amma giving us, is that Prakriti or Purusha? Swami Atmananda, who does the bhakti retreats and mantra retreats from Amritapuri, he said it's a living energy. So it is a form of, is it a form of Purusha? Well, what we know about these mantras, all these mantras basically come from the Supreme Being, because they contain the bija aksharas, or the seed letters. And all these mantras, just like the Vedas, they are there in Akasha, in the space, in the ether, in a subtle form. They exist in this universe, and they have been there from the beginning, and they will be there until the end. And then they will be there in the next creation as well. So these mantras, it depends. When you chant it, it is prakriti, whereas you are creating a sound, a vibration. It's a thought in your mind. But because that mantra actually comes from the beyond, it can help us attain that as well. Amma is imbuing it with her divine energy. She has made it divine for us. And she plants that seed in us. And now we need to nurture that seed of the mantra, the Guru mantra, and through our regular practice of it. And we become the gardener who nurtures that seed so it can grow to its full potential. And once it grows to that full potential, the prakriti aspect of the mantra doesn't matter so much, because you identify with that. And it's actually something that, with the Guru's grace, can take us to the beyond. Because it doesn't have a shape, it doesn't have a form. Of course, it has a vibration if you speak it, if you chant it under your breath or softly. It has a vibration, but it is also beyond form. So it can just be that silent awareness within us, and then it can take us beyond. So who knows, Amma may use that as the life preserver to pull us out of samsara and into the realm of non-duality. So for us, the answer is that for us now it is prakriti, but it can help us reach the state beyond that. Can you elaborate on the difference between dharmic action and the notion of doership, ownership? Specifically, there are actions that some of the management at my company take or do that cause struggle for peers and my direct reports. Their actions and attitude causes inefficiencies and delays for the company. I could just do nothing and have no attachment to the outcome, but I feel the dharmic action here is to fight for change that would help my reports and improve the outcome for the company. What is the right attitude to have in this situation? Well, my feeling about these things and what I have understood from my time with Amma is that dharmic action means doing what is right at the right time and in the right way. So that right way includes, and right time and right, doing the right thing, that all connects with a proper understanding of our own abilities, our stage in life, our role in society, and the immediate situation. So there may be something that is true, and maybe somebody is trying to twist the facts or something like that. Well, you also have to understand maybe it's not the time to act then. Maybe you sometimes need to do it later. Let them calm down, where they might actually accept what you're trying to say. And are you the right person to say it, or should someone else say it? Is it your position to say it, or would they listen if someone else said it instead? Even though it's true, they have to accept it. So they may be ready to accept it better when it comes from somebody else. And are we capable of conveying that at the same time? Some people, when they mean well, but when they speak, it comes out wrong, and it gets people angry. So, and also stage in life, like let's say they're older than you. So sometimes just having an older person, someone who's older than them, telling them, they might find it easier to accept. And the immediate situation, if it's a crisis, then everybody, all these other points become secondary, because crisis situations are unique. Even a brahmachari or even a sannyasi can touch a woman if she's drowning, right? Or vice versa. A sannyasini can touch a man if he's drowning, right? It's not, gender doesn't matter at times like that, right? You're just saving them. You can't say, oh no, I've taken a vow, I'm just going to watch them drown. That's foolishness. So in crisis situations, the rules change. But is it a crisis? If we have this attachment to telling people what to do, we might blurt it out. But there was probably a more diplomatic way of doing it that would have achieved more rather than in just making them angry. So you really have to ask yourself, is it my role to correct this person in the first place? If it's your offspring, yes. And if they're not adults yet, yes. And even when it is your children, it may be painful for you to discipline them, at times. But you still have to do it, right? Because that's your duty. But if it's not your role, then you might want to use the situation as a way to develop patience, even if that is painful for you. So what is painful for you is sometimes the right thing. It helps you overcome your impatience. It helps you overcome your sort of impulsiveness and all these things. So you can, before you say, I have to do this, it's dharmic, you should ask yourself, is this an expression of my vasanas, or will I get stronger if I don't react like this? Am I just going to make my anger tendency or bossy tendencies even stronger, or am I going to get patience by not saying anything? So that's where we need to be very frank with ourselves. Thank you so much. What do we do when we have physical pain? How do we overcome that pain? Well, that is certainly not an easy thing, I know. When we are in physical pain, it just shows us how deeply we are identified with this body. And it doesn't go away just like that because you've read the Bhagavad Gita. Sorry to say, it takes time, and we really need to identify with something higher than the body in order to relinquish that identification with the body. So mitigating that pain is the first approach. It's only a band-aid solution, obviously. But let's say you want to meditate, you want to chant your mantra, but you can't even do that because you're in so much pain. Then not mitigating the pain can be, a hindrance on your spiritual path. So there may be some way that is acceptable to you to mitigate it with herbs or whatever, allopathic, Ayurvedic, whatever you choose. You can do that. Don't feel guilty about it. And also at the same time, understand that pain is a teacher, not just anatomically, because it has a function in the human body to tell us don't do that. It's bad for this part of your body, so that's why the pain impulses come. But at the same time, we don't have to erase all the pain. Leave enough of it there that will make us strong. It's helpful for us to overcome our weakness, inner weakness. We can also think of it from the karmic standpoint. How did I get this pain? Why did I get this pain? Is it a product of my lifestyle? Because we get in all kinds of sort of patterns and we don't realize until they create pain in the body or the mind. So did I make wrong decisions in my life and my lifestyle, and then I ended up doing something that is now creating physical pain for me? Or is it just an inexplicable chronic state that nobody can diagnose, in which case I have to accept it as my karma and just understand that I'm learning something from that, and it's something that I cannot sidestep in this birth. Even then, it still teaches us to detach from the body and to increase our inner strength. So in my case, when I was a teenager, I discovered, or the doctor discovered, that I had a calcium bridge between two bones in my left ankle. And we tried, my parents were keen to get it fixed. They tried a bunch of things. It never got better. I still have the same condition. And it has effects, it affects you in different ways. But I learned to live with it. And maybe because I have that thing which causes pain, I have become stronger, and now I don't even pay attention to it. So it's like what the astrologer said to one man who came to him. He says to the astrologer, "I'm having so many problems in my life now." And the astrologer said, 7.5 years, you're going to have a lot of suffering in your life. And then the guy said, "Okay, and then everything will be okay after that?" And he said, "Well, after that, you'll get used to it and you won't even think about it anymore." So it's like that. And also allergies has been a chronic thing for me as well. So it's just, you begin to transcend it in some small way. There were 2 people who requested access to the daily live stream, and I've passed on those email addresses. I hope you'll get the access soon. And there was one just kind of logistical question about the status of the ashrams, at least in North America. This person saw people doing arati during Guru Purnima, and they were thinking maybe the ashram is not closed anymore. Are some people allowed to come? So it was mostly residents of the ashram doing the arati on Guru Purnima. There were a very small number of people who are not residents, like some people who are part of the bhajan team, and some who have been doing some outdoor seva. Even during the worst time of COVID, they would come and do weeding and things like that. So we gave, as it was a way to give some opportunity to them to celebrate on Guru Purnima. It was an exception to the rule, and yes, the ashrams do remain closed for the time being. We're all looking forward to that time when we can say, the doors are wide open, everybody come on down. But if you're living here in the United States, you might have seen the latest news. The CDC is kind of rolling back the rules, and all 49 out of the 50 states are having issues. So I think we're not going to be relaxing the guidelines anytime soon. We have to see how everything pans out. We here maybe have to, take 1 or 2 steps back, just because of all the new cases coming out. So let's all be careful. Let's all be very safe. Amma is very clear about that, and encouraging everybody to get the vaccine. I know that's a hot topic, but yeah, we know from Amma's guidance that only people who have that vaccination can even come do seva in the ashrams. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and we just pray to Amma that by following all the required guidelines, we'll all be together again in each person's respective ashrams and centers, and we can be celebrating our love for Amma together in person. Praying that day comes soon, as soon as possible, by Amma's grace. Om Namah Shivaya. So we will chant 2 mantras first to conclude the class part of this tonight's program, after which we will have a brief meditation to absorb what we have learned from Lord Krishna and Amma tonight. Take a deep breath. Om Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. lokaha samastaha sugino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Those of you who have time, please join us for a brief meditation. Close your eyes. Check your posture and slow down the breathing process. With each long, deep breath, feel the mind going deeper and the flow of thoughts slowing down further and further. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel as though you are in her arms. She's embracing you. You feel one with her. A divine presence within you. Now let us focus our awareness on the peaceful flow of the breathing process. Be fully aware of each and every breath, but only as the witness of the breath. You are watching that harmonious flow, and it flows on its own without any intervention of ours. Just like the breathing process takes place when we are in deep sleep, completely unaware of it. In the same way, the breathing process goes on, and now we are witnessing it consciously. And let us expand that witness consciousness to the entire body. Not only the breathing process, but everything else from head to toe. All the bodily functions, we are simply watching. The body is doing its dharma based on the gunas. I am not the gunas. I am witnessing, aware of all that's going on. Now trying to remain in that witness state. Expand that even more to include the people you encountered today. That witness consciousness in you is the exact same Chaitanya consciousness in them. Whether they praised us or criticized us or were indifferent, we can try to see them as being the same in essence. Expanding the notion even further. Remember that that pure consciousness is none other than Amma's essence, Amma's true being. By seeing the same witness consciousness in others, we are, in fact, seeing Amma in them. And we can feel love for them, for all beings. That is the true bhakti. That is what Krishna is saying and what Amma is demonstrating to us. As we remain in that witness consciousness, let us still try to preserve it as long as possible and chant the closing mantra. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Amriteshwariye Namaha. Thank you for joining us. Saturday's bhajans will be coming from East Coast, and we have a program, a Homa, here on next Sunday. So I'm not sure if we will have Gita class next week, but hopefully so. We'll do our best. And just you can look out for the e-news and find out what's happening next week. Om Namah Shivaya.